What is up, my ducks and drakes? Welcome to the Crawdad Lake. Today, we are reading Bad Moon Rising by Bekka911, chapters 10 through the end. Before we begin, this is perfect because this is the Dark Side book of Bekka's series, and it's Janus' birthday. Happy birthday, Janus. Nice to have you birthdaying. We will now continue into Chapter 10. If you'd like to follow along with the book, the link is in the description as well as the link to Bekka's actual Wattpad things, so you could check out all their stories, because don't go back and listen to my Wattpad Read Alouds and all of them. I was like 8. I'm kidding. I was like 13 when I read those, but Rebuilding the wall was complicated. Deceit loathed to admit it, but the task was quickly becoming an impossible thing. It didn't seem to matter how much power he and Remus poured into it. Its gleaming fragments, still stilted, empty space remained just that. Gleaming fragments and stilled empty space. Even with the damn voice helping, nothing was happening. Their energy was going nowhere. Remus fell onto his butt, splaying his legs and huffing. "This is useless," he complained. "I don't know why I let you talk me into this." "I talked you into nothing, Remus. You did this yourself." "Glad to see you totally repentant," Remus grumbled, crossing his arms. He looked for all the world like a pouting child. Deceit decided to keep that particular comment to himself. No use insulting the help. Besides, Remus had a point. What they were doing clearly wasn't working, but Deceit had no idea what else they could try. He could barely remember what they'd done to build the wall in the first place. He'd had Virgil beside him then, not Remus, and maybe that made the difference. Maybe it didn't. Deceit didn't know anymore. Tick-tock, Deceit. He gritted his teeth and kicked at Remus's sprained legs. "Get up!" he hissed. "We don't have time for this." Remus snarled viciously, baring his teeth. Deceit wrinkled his nose, not fazed in the slightest. Remus was only terrifying if you didn't know about his limited supply of brain cells, and fortunately Deceit was well past the small tidbit of information. What he was more concerned about was the fact that they weren't getting anywhere. Remus clambered to his feet slowly, grinning at some of his joints cracked. "Are you sure we can't just rebuild it?" he questioned, poking the large piece of Deceit's hands listlessly. "'Cause I don't know about you, but this is getting pretty damn tedious." Deceit's lips pulled away from his teeth, his breath hissing out at him. "If we build it," he said very tightly, "then we will give all our energy and cease to exist." Remus held up his hands and backed away, kicking at the rubble remains, as though he were debating whether or not to throw a tantrum. Deceit very seriously considered wrapping shadows around his neck and yanking. Somehow he figured the voice wouldn't approve of that move. He dropped the piece of wall, dusting his hands off. "We shouldn't do this," he muttered to himself, feeling the shadows slip under his cloak and curl around him, trying to offer comfort. The wall shouldn't have broken, and the light sides shouldn't be winning, and Virgil should still be here, and maybe we wouldn't be in this mess. For a moment, the only noise was Deceit's heavy breathing. Even Remus stood stock still, his foot raised in the air. The shadows screeched faintly, swishing in all. Deceit didn't bother to soothe them, but because he already was too far past composure. He just wanted Virgil back. Why couldn't he have that? He deserved to have Virgil by his side. He deserved not to be alone. He didn't deserve to be abandoned. He hadn't deserved to be thrown into the darkness all that time ago, but that happened too. Finally, Remus snorted, breaking the tense silence. "The fuck you want Virgil for?" He cracked himself and spun around. "Right now, with his mellow vibes, the most he could do is use his fake spider web to put pieces together. You need to move past him, D. Move on. focus on bigger things. What did you just say? Deceit whirled around, the shadows scratching at his flushed cheek. He brushed them off half-heartedly as Remus stopped spinning. The crinkle in the Duke's brow proved he had absolutely no idea about the genius he was exhibiting. About the webs. Deceit cut himself off, feeling something hot build in his chest. Webs. Webs. It was right there. Oh, how has he not seen it? Virgil, it all spun back to Virgil. It all started and ended with Virgil, and Deceit let that hot power grow and grow until it was a part of him, and his veins were burning with it. He clicked his fingers absently, summoning Remus to his side. Grab a piece, he instructed, grabbing his own fragment before focusing on the heart racing through him, carefully, oh so carefully, pulling out the faintest thread of it. It weaved around his fingers like a stray living piece of twine, and it cooed at it, coaxing it onto the piece of the wall. What are you doing? Remus breathed. Deceit didn't answer, instead pushing the two pieces together and carefully leading the thin strand of power to the edge of his piece, pressing a finger against it to squish it to the side. He led it over to Remus's piece before squashing it there. His gloves warned at the touch. The shadows recoiled with a hiss. The end result? A stitch. Deceit watched breathlessly as the yellow stitch forced that section of two pieces together, fusing them back into one solid, glittering chunk. Remus swore quietly. Deceit started, transfixed as the black marble of the wall occasionally flickered with the slightest yellow glow. Remus thrust the kind of fixed section of wall into Deceit's hands, reaching down and grabbing another chunk. He smashed them together, his eager eyes wordlessly telling Deceit to create another stitch. Deceit took a breath, ignoring the shadows that crawled at his skin and shrieked in their whispery voices, and forced another strand of heat out. This time, the stitch landed side by side with a thin strand of green energy. When they both dissolved, all three pieces had completely sealed together. Remus laughed and laughed and laughed. Deceit said nothing, but forced another stitch, and another, and another. The shadows dug deep enough to draw blood. Another, and another, and another. Virgil stumbled onto the wall of his room, clawing at his chest, and something yanked inside of him. He could feel it, the energy that was being sucked out of him mercilessly. He knew the feeling, knew what it meant, and he hates it because it could only be Deceit that was rebuilding the wall. Deceit was rebuilding the wall, and Virgil couldn't halt him for it. Oh god, it hurt. But Virgil was okay with it, because damn if it wasn't the smartest thing to do. The dark side's at full power, had enough juice to completely decimate Thomas's mind. Even Virgil, with every single drop of power, was finding it hard to control himself around the other three. He was too full, had too much power. He was towing the line, and now Deceit was rebuilding the wall, and Virgil was battling the urge to go back. He wanted to go back. He bit down on his lip as another tug sent stars wheeling across his vision. Another tug. Another. Another. Somewhere in the darkness, the ticking had stopped. Chapter 11. Deceit was spinning. He was twirling, twisting, and contorting in a way that made his bones crunch and grind together, made his skin pull, taunt, and stretch further. It wasn't possible, but he was twisting and twisting and spinning, his core tightening and tightening until there was a snap, and the piece of the wall that he'd been clutching fell to the ground and broke into even smaller pieces. Remus swore colorfully, jumping back. His green stitch failed limply in the air before dissolving into green speckles. What the hell, D? Remus snapped. We don't have time for this! Deceit heard him. Of course he did. Why wouldn't he? It was hard to ignore someone where there was no other sounds. The shadows around him hung over his shoulders, tired and worn and oh so hollow. Something had shifted. Something had changed. Listen, he hissed, lowering into a shallow crouch. His skin prickled. His left pinky twinkled. The shadows stirred weakly and tapped at his scales, pressed the scabs from where they had drawn blood. Deceit didn't brush him off. Remus gave him a strange look, leaning on his club and picking at his teeth. You've got a couple of screws loose there. Deceit bared his teeth. A stray thin strand of darkness cooed in his ear, pressing against the line of his cheek. Something cold pulled at the base of his spine. Something's wrong, he murmured quietly. Remus grunted dismissively. Whatever, man. Can we go back to what we're supposed to be doing? We've got a countdown, remember? Forget the countdown. Something's wrong. Deceit! Remus snapped, and Deceit startled because Remus didn't like to address him like that. Remus teased and taunted and thought up crude nicknames. He glared at his companion. Remus glared right back. You crazy son of a bitch, Remus snarled, keeping his voice low. I know what you're trying to achieve by doing this, but it won't work if we don't hurry. The others are already here, Duke, a cool voice interrupted. Remus bristled, lifting his weapon as though it would do any good. Deceit raised his chin and settled his face into something calm and disinterested. The shadows that were draped over his shoulders moved in unease. Something skittered past them, invisible and fast. Deceit ignored the feeling that racked in his veins. I've seen we've all gathered here today. He twitched his mouth into a crescent moon smirk. Celebrating something we are. Or perhaps a morning. The same cool voice said, and tone edged with something dangerously close to displeasure. After all, this is the second time you've decided to betray us, Deceit, and we do not take lightly to traitors. You took well to Virgil, and he left first. Virgil made some interesting choices, but we did not banish him beyond the wall. It's a shame, Deceit, how quickly you forgot the lessons you learned during your time of exile. Deceit's blood strained under his skin, the shadows around him warping and hissing with outrage. He made friends with them during his exile. They felt rather strongly about what had happened there, what Deceit had faced, and Deceit had touched and known. He shouldn't have survived being thrust into unforgiving darkness. That much concentrated dark energy should have torn him apart, shredded him into nothing. It hadn't. Deceit had absorbed. When he'd emerged, passing through the wall with ease, now that he made of the same hatred and darkness, he twisted his shadows around Remus's neck and forced the same ugly, twisted essence under his skin. Betrayal does not equal favor, Duke. The only thing that had saved Remus from Deceit's wrath was the promise that he would help retrieve Virgil. At the time, Deceit had agreed with a smile because he fully intended to throw Virgil into the same darkness he'd just come back from, and then watch his anxiety was born anew. Now, well, Deceit's grin got a little too sharp, a little too dangerous. He fully intended to throw someone behind the wall. It just wasn't Virgil anymore. Listen, Remus drawled, kicking at the rubble. I really don't think you know what's happening here. I know enough, Duke, the cool voice dismissed. Deceit hummed to himself, reaching inwards and dipping a finger into the dwelling pool inside his chest. A thin strand of yellow chased the shadows down in his skin, but halted at his fingertips, twisting around in his nails. The energy was warm, heady, angry. This was the magic he learned during his exile. I think, he said, consideringly staring at the owner of the cool voice, that you should have him talk. The thread of energy shot away his fingers, and the cool voice choked, a horrified cry as Deceit drained away everything, like it had been a battery and nothing more. Logan knew the second Deceit had entered the room. The white walls turned gray with fear, and there were sudden shadows Shuddering and baying in the corners, bloodthirsty and cruel, Logan was not afraid. He was not the pawn in Deceit's game. Not yet. "Ah, Logan," Deceit purred, somewhere behind him. His voice was pitched low, the smooth tones rich and honeyed. He wanted something. He knew something. Logan sighed to himself and turned around, adjusting his glasses casually. "Snake?" he greeted, easily adopting Virgil's nickname without really thinking about it. "I trust there's a reason of your being here." Deceit's smile, low and soft, and chills darted up Logan's arms. He was not a fearful person by nature, but something about Deceit seemed otherworldly, unnatural. There was a shimmer to the shadows, a hollowness in his eyes. Something had happened in the darkness recently, and it had changed a variable. Thomas's fatigue was shifting, mutating. "Logan," Deceit hummed again. That alone was proof enough. Logan gripped onto his arm of the chair, feeling an irrational sliver of anger burn in his throat. "What have you done?" he demanded, voice hard and cold. "What have you done, Deceit? If you've broken the code..." Deceit laughed, silky and gentle. Logan cut himself off. "Relax," Deceit said soothingly, shadows falling between his fingers like sand. "I know the code. I haven't done anything that may harm my host. The changes I've made are minimal. I've removed a problem, something Thomas won't miss. You must trust me, Logan." "I do not place my trust in a liar." "Ah!" Deceit paused, amused. "A liar." Logan was not fond of games. "If you will not tell me what it is you're changing, then I demand that we resolve the situation with Patton." Deceit gasped mockingly, face schooled in a perfect imitation of surprise. The shadows chattered in glee. Logan fought to swallow his words. Deceit dropped to the act after a moment, lips twisting into a hateful smile. "Oh dear," he said soundly, the softness in his voice lined with steel and barbs. "How tangled this has become. You see? There is no situation with Patton. There's only truth, honesty, and pain." "You cannot speak about truth while being embodied with lies." "Logan," Deceit's smile only became more twisted. "Is this comfort you gave Virgil too? I must say, it explains why you went off the rails like he did. It must be hard, choosing you lovely light sides, only to be scorned and hurt." Logan gritted his teeth. "We have moved past that." Deceit cackled, the sound unhinging and jackal-like. It was not what Deceit usually sounded like. Logan's chest tightened with unease. Whatever was shifting with the dark sides, it was obvious that Deceit was in the middle of it. After a moment, Deceit settled, clucking his tongue. Logan almost missed the thin tendril of yellow energy that hissed over Deceit's scales. "I did not come here to discuss Virgil," the liar said. "He made his choice. He won't make that mistake again. No. I'm here about Patton." Logan was tempted to ask about the blatant lie, the Fox's dismissal of Virgil as a topic of conversation. It was obvious that Virgil's destination of the dark sides had left a fault line, a crack, a splinter. Now they were breaking apart, and Deceit was the earthquake that was forcing them into pieces. But there was something on Deceit's face, an emotion that seemed to be at odds with the rest of the snake's emotions. Logan could see the vulnerability tucked away behind the sneer of mockery. Deceit was at war with himself. Maybe this was Logan's chance. "Virgil, do not!" Deceit snarled, his slippery ease vanishing in an instant. "I am here about Patton. He is my experiment, and you meddling light sides are ruining things with your optimism. Stop trying to help him. You will achieve nothing." "I demand you leave him alone, Deceit," Logan argued angrily, his anger frigid and jagged. His voice was ragged and frosty. "Your pushing has caused monumental change within the group dynamic. We have a serious situation on our hands. Deceit's features softened once more, and the shadows in the corner of his room blurred until they were being settled with soft. Logan, everything is fine. Patton's just dealing with his issue. Isn't that what you lot all love to do? Work through issues independently while being extremely angsty. Cold fury was rising in Logan. A natural response to the mockery that Deceit was exuding, he slapped the arm of the chair, rising to his feet. Deceit eyes him curiously. Patton is not a part of your games, he said lowly. Virgil and Roman are not a part of your games. I am not a part of your games. Stop meddling, Deceit. Nothing good will come of it. Deceit's easy humor darkened. My job is to Thomas, not to you. And how do you think Thomas will cope with the constant emotional trauma, Logan couldn't stop the ice from slipping out of his voice. Your meddling sets us off balance, yes, but we have the main aspects of Thomas's personality. How do you think our host will adapt to us being at odds? How well do you think he'll cope with the constant fighting and emotional outbursts and unbalanced emotions? Deceit's shadow squirmed. The tiny yellow thread sparked at Deceit's scales. Is this care for Thomas, or a concern for your lovely little Patton? Without thinking, without considering that this was what Deceit wanted, Logan said, My host is priority. Patton's refusal to acknowledge his emotions grows tedious and repetitive. Victory dominated Deceit's expression, and Logan collapsed into his chair, defeated and upset. He hated Deceit, hated the way the dark side could twist his words as easily as he could twist his appearance. Well, Deceit cooed smugly. Now the truth comes out, and you call me the liar. Get out. Logan's voice was flat. Deceit laughed that jackal laugh, but obediently sketched a bold bow and stepped into the shadows, flickering away. In between blinks, he vanished. And then it was like he'd never been there at all. Remus skittered away from Deceit when he appeared, the final piece of the wall scattering under his feet. Deceit ignored him, surveying the almost completed wall with no small measure of satisfaction. Things were progressing, and progressing well. There was one more step he needed to complete, one more job to do before he could finish the wall. He turned to Remus, who stared back, lips pressed together tightly. Deceit raised an eyebrow. Is there something wrong, darling Duke? Remus paled slightly, shaking his head. Fuck, you're really scary, he said, exhaling sharply. You're going feralty. It's this damn wall. If we weren't always so close to the damn thing, you wouldn't have... He cut himself off and looked away. Deceit frowned. Surely you aren't still on about the incident before? Remus twitched, but he said nothing. Deceit scoffed. That was unfortunate, yes, but necessary. Look how much of the wall we managed to fix with that extra energy. We aren't extendable, Remus said quietly but firmly. The dark sides aren't batteries, okay? You drained one of us dry without thought, and you made it slow. You wouldn't have done that before. Oh, wouldn't I? Deceit made sure that when he bared his teeth, there were yellow sparks falling from his mouth. He felt dangerous. Remus shook his head and turned away. The way you're acting, it's the way you acted when you came back from beyond the wall. Deceit grappled with thin threads inside of him, splaying out through his body like puppet strings, sizzled under his grip. He said in a low, predatory voice, I'm astounded that you haven't noticed, Remus. It's a little disappointing, if I'm honest. Remus spun around and quirked an eyebrow. What? Realization lit his eyes. Deceit nodded, running an invisible finger along the yellow strings inside himself. Our clock stopped. Time had run out. The moment was now. Chapter 12. See, depending on who you thought the hero was, the story started like this. Deceit had known for a long time before Virgil left that there was something broken in the dark sides. It wasn't a loud broken, and it didn't stand out amongst the other heartbreaks and hairline fractures that made them who they were. No, it was an internal injury, like broken ribs. It caused pain, but that pain blended into other pain, and then that pain bled into anger, and it all became a giant tangle of feelings that nobody wanted to feel. That thing that was broken only grew more so, and her balance shifted, like a scale that couldn't find equilibrium. All at once, the light sides had the high ground, and the dark sides sank down into further darkness. Branded and labeled and shut away like unimaginable horrors. The thing that was broken broke some more. Bitterness crept in. Resentment, fear, anger, betrayal. They tried to bury those feelings at first. All of them flung the excess of emotion and power beyond the wall, hoping that this would lift them back up and they would mend whatever had gone wrong. They sank lower. He clung to Virgil because he was scared of that broken thing, but Virgil drew away. Deceit saw the signs, wanted to plead his friend to stay with him, but he knew that the broken thing was breaking Virgil too, so he let him go, and he watched as Virgil slipped between those cracks, escaped into the brightness of the light sides, and he mourned. The scales tipped further. Virgil's escape pushed the light sides higher, and the dark sides lower. And the broken thing crumbled into nothing, but glittered pieces of glass. Deceit felt them stab into his vulnerable skin with each breath that he took after Virgil leaving. Rajid grew to protect him. He became a monster who wanted to leave, a monster who longed for his friend, for freedom, a monster who began to plan. But see, depending on who your hero was, the story went like this. Remus never knew Virgil's intention, Deceit's real name, not for a long time. For a while, he entertained the thought, writing down guesses to keep himself occupied as the cracks around them all grew, because Remus wasn't an idiot. Change was coming, and it would be Deceit and Virgil who brought it down around them. So Remus waited, and he waited, and when Virgil left, and Deceit was alone, Remus became the shadows, and was broke. Deceit grew scales, and Remus grew to understand that Deceit's name was a lost thing, because Deceit had only given his name to Virgil, and then Virgil had taken that knowledge and walked away, so learning Deceit's name was pointless, because that name didn't belong to Deceit anymore. Deceit grew scales. Deceit started to change his behavior. He's going to leave, Remus informed the others dryly. He's going to follow Virgil to the light sides. Impossible, not impossible, Remus corrected. Just unlikely. The day that Deceit tried to escape, Remus grabbed him by the arms and dragged him to the wall, where the others had gathered. Heartbroken were they, willing to lend an ear when Deceit thrashed and pleaded to be heard. You don't understand, Deceit begged on his knees because he was weak without Virgil. Remus's lip curled in distaste. We can leave. We can all go back to the light sides and it'll be okay. Remus shook his head. This is another betrayal, he said. Deceit's eyes widened. We've already lost Virgil to the traitors. We aren't going to lose you to them, too. They found a loose spot in the wall, threw Deceit behind it, and patched it up so they couldn't hear his screams. And then they all went away, because that was another one who had chosen to leave. That broken thing twisted and morphed until it was inside of all of them, until they were all broken, too. So broken, in fact, that Remus began to ache for Deceit to come back. It was impossible, of course. The energies behind the wall would ensure that Deceit would never be whole again. But he wished. So he sat by the wall and he read those names in swirling energy. Lucilin? He guessed one day. He shook his head. No. Alex? Mason? Lillian? I don't know. Nobody answered him, until they did. Remus was tired the day it started happening, the day that the wall cracked and wavered. He reached to the bottom of his list, and so he was just sitting and listened to the sound of nothing. Janus, a voice rasped, crackling with both pain and power. Remus whirled around, staring into manic yellow eyes, and felt his lips split into a grin that was too wide to his face. Deceit. No. Janus mimicked the smile with far too many teeth. Shadows hissed and stemmed on his skin. His scales glimmered in the remains of what was recoiling behind the wall. And then Deceit went back, more broken than any of them. A gate slammed down between them and those who had forced them down there to begin with. So no matter who the hero was, it was all going to end like this. The voice was all around them, furious and flickering, because Deceit had been behind the wall, and he'd become something else, but he never stopped planning to get away. He'd bided his time, and he played the bad guy, and he'd pulled Remus along too, but he was going to get them both out. What is the meaning of this? His voice hissed. Deceit shrugged. You were never really clear on what you wanted us to do, so we fixed it. You fixed it? It was meant to be unfixable, Remus cackled. Fuck you. Probably not the best answer, Deceit mused as the cackling storm around them seemed to darken, imploding in on itself and manifesting whatever shadow had been trailing them all along. The voice didn't have a shape, had lost in the abyss, but it still had a presence, which was what Deceit had been relying on. He gestured for Remus to hand him the final chunk of the wall. You see, he purred, the nose of the clock running out and the final starling erupting all the carefully laid plans. I have spent years waiting for this. We took some detours to get here, but here we are. Finally. The voice snarled, something latched into Deceit's skin. Remus howled somewhere in the background. Deceit took another step forwards. You are impudent, the voice accused. You are the traitor to cause. How dare you? How dare I? Deceit thundered. How dare you? You stole my body and my will, so I will do what I must to ensure that you never bother anybody again. He shoved with all his power and all his strength and all his anger and hurt and tears, and then he slammed the piece of the wall back into place and made a stitch, and then another and another and another, until he was sobbing while he was forcing his power out. Remus didn't touch him. Remus just added a stitch beside him, staying silent until Deceit crumbled to his knees, and it was over. It was over. The ticking stopped. It was over. The last. Deceit had one last card to play, one last plan to spring to life. It was going to hurt, and he was sick of things hurting. He really was, but he was willing to hurt for Virgil, because that's what this all came down to, not bringing Virgil back to them, not because he was theirs. It was about following him into the light, about redemption for Deceit and Remus, because even the bad guys were good guys once, and even every bad guy has the potential to be good again. So Deceit picked himself up, but put himself back together, told Remus to wait, and walked into the shadows where something evil had once lived. Nothing lived there anymore. The abyss was empty, the wall was together again, and perhaps the wall was stronger now, not weaker, because Deceit had put more than his power into fixing it. He had put more than shimmering darkness. He'd put the light into it, purple, green, and yellow, because he was tired of the seething, withering darkness that he'd had to grovel and live in. He was tired of pretending that Virgil belonged only to the dark sides, because Virgil had found happiness somewhere else, and Deceit. No. Janus had every intention of following him into those arms of comfort and safety. "Don't do it," Remus said quietly, following Janus into the shadows. They wriggled in to make space for him. Janus didn't dare look back at him. Not yet. Not now. We can go home. Janus shook his head. "At what cost?" he asked, desperately, squeezing his eyes shut. "What left for us there?" The shadows brushed along Deceit's face, hissing along the scales that hadn't been there once. Janus had hated them for so long, had even once tried to rip them off, but they soothed him now. He'd grown his own armor. He'd protected himself. He didn't need whatever hollow support the dark sides could offer him. "Remus," he whispered to the shadows. "Please." Remus's hand landed on Deceit's shoulder and spun him around. My, how they changed in the moment of introspection. Janus could see them both as they'd been, eyes full of anger and pain and loss, blood fizzling, and with the need to not be alone, the need to stop watching their friends leave them behind. Wild things. That's what they'd been. Wild things that lashed out and screamed and pretended to be bad when they were really just hurting. "You can't go," Remus said through gritted teeth, even as indecision warned with regret in his eyes. "You can't just leave. You can't go back to Virgil again and again and again. One day you have to stop." And yes, one day Janus would. He would stop running, and he would stop fighting, and he would stop trying to be everything that he knew he wasn't. But Thomas needed him not to be a dark side. Janus needed himself not to be a dark side. There was so much more to him, so much more that he could be doing. "Please," he said again, one last time before. Because if Remus didn't go with him now, then Janus would leave him, like Virgil had left him, and they would only ever see themselves as enemies. "Please." And Remus's hand lifted off his shoulder. The loss of the touch resonated through the shadows, resonated through Janus's body, as Remus took with him the last strand of Deceit. Because Deceit had been a dark side, and Deceit had been bitter, and Deceit had wanted so much more for himself and for his people, and now Janus was something gray at best and nothing at all at worst. "Goodbye, old friend," said Remus, his composure and cunning and emotion strained and molded into something dangerously close to affection. It would be the last time that Janus would ever hear such a thing, because they were enemies now. Remus wasn't going to leave the dark sides, not like Virgil had done, not like Janus had done. And maybe that'd scare him, because they'd all been so intent on getting Virgil back, so intent on making him theirs again. They'd hunt Janus down, and they'd once hunted Virgil, and they'd be so much less than what they were, because there was so much less to them. The dark sides just kept on losing, and Deceit was the one who thought he could have won it all back. Janus knew, without seeing it, that Virgil was there, and that Remus had gone back to them, had left him to the shadows, and Janus himself commanded. And maybe it was supposed to hurt that Janus wasn't the first one to leave, but freedom prickles along whatever human skin Janus had left. He was done. He was out. He was gray at best and nothing at all at worst. There was longing in him, he thought, as he dissolved into the shadows. He wanted to go to Virgil now, wanted to get down on his knees and plead for his friend to take him back, to let him in, to please not cast him out into nothing. He'd done all this for Virgil. Virgil might have done it for him too once, but he couldn't, not now, not after what Deceit had said to his old friend, desperate in his attempts to get Virgil back, not after what Deceit had done to Patton, what Deceit had done to tear them apart, because Patton hadn't deserved that, and though it hadn't worked itself out, Janus still hadn't said sorry. Patton hadn't asked him to. So Janus couldn't go to Virgil, not yet, not until he mended things with the others, not until he'd apologized and begged and thrown himself at the mercy of one person who might be able to talk Virgil into letting Janus stay. I think it's time we finally had a talk. A quiet voice from the doorway as Janus sat on Patton's bed and stared at his hands. They were gray hands now, but there were stains on them, under his gloves, forever stained by the darkness that he'd lived in for too many years, hands that shouldn't be a part of him but were. He looked up at Patton, who glowed strong and sure in the dismisses of the room. Janus wanted to be strong like that, wanted to be light like that. No lies, he begged. He was tired of lies, he was tired of all of it. He was gray at best, nothing all at worst. Patton nodded his essence, and Deceit looked back down at his gloved hands. How can you forgive me after what I've done? When Patton didn't do anything but appraise him continuously, Janus felt a part of him wither away and die. He was afraid of this, was so desperately afraid of not being allowed here, on this side of the wall that separated them, because he couldn't go back. Remus would never accept him again. Nobody would ever accept him again. Janus couldn't let himself be deceived. Not again. Not now. Not after everything. Patton sat on the bed beside him. Janus didn't know what that meant. When Virgil first became his side, I was terrified, Patton admitted gently, spreading his fingers on the duvet. Janus tried not to lean away from the words. I couldn't combat the energies he was giving off. I went with it because I liked to avoid conflict. He kept pushing Thomas, kept pushing us. I didn't understand him. Why couldn't he see what he was doing to our host? And Janus knew that. He promised he did. He didn't want to hurt Thomas, and now he found he didn't really want to hurt the others either. Janus was gray at best, nothing at all at worst. He flinched away. Patton didn't let him go far. It took me a long time to figure out that he was just as scared as I was, Patton continued softly. He hid behind his name and his purpose. We let him do that, and then we shunned him for that. I've not quite forgiven myself for that. And, he'd ever felt threatened by Patton. Janus couldn't understand, because this settled understanding side with nothing short of a miracle, nothing short of a message sent him just as the grip was slipping from the edge. Remus should have been this for him. Remus had tried to be this for him. Remus had been broken by Virgil leaving, had been broken by his fear. Patton had been made stronger by it. Janus wanted to say sorry, didn't know how to make his words fit out his mouth. Because he was sorry, words couldn't express the regret that he felt, the pain he'd caused himself by trying to spread his misery to everyone else. He tried to make his voice work, to tell the light side that he was so scared of slipping back into the shadows, of being a monster again. He wanted to say that he wanted Virgil, he wanted love, that he wanted to be safe. Patton smiled and moved his hand until his fingers were brushing against Janus's. An offer. A lifeline. A bond of friendship that would form as soon as Janus let himself reach back. We'll be ready, Patton promised as Janus accepted the tentative offer. Whenever you decide you want to join us, we'll be waiting with open arms. The shadows seemed a little less dark after that. Janus was gray at worst. A light side, a friend, a brother, at best. The epilogue. Wrecking havoc was so goddamn fun. Why Remus hasn't done this earlier was beyond him, because he'd never enjoyed himself this much, being out in the open, being recognized and confronted just as he could turn it around and flood Thomas with some truly twisted thoughts. No wonder Deceit had liked the games with them. They made it so easy, and Virgil, Remus did his best not to address his fellow side directly, because that's what Virgil was expecting, and so he would have his defenses up. What a sensitive soul Virgil had become in this time with the light sides. How amusing and utterly pathetic. If he'd just stayed where he belonged, with the sides that were the scary ones, Virgil wouldn't be so vulnerable and weak and disgusting. Creativity is about butterflies and magic, Thomas said, hopelessly throwing his arms out. That's not you, you're stinky, Remus offered. Thomas just drew his hands close to his chest again. Scary. Oh, that wouldn't do at all. Remus wasn't the scary one. He wasn't around the afflictive fear. No. He was creativity, just like Roman. Me? Scary? He said, feeling just slightly offended. Surely Thomas didn't know that little about him. Surely the others hadn't kept him so sheltered and ignorant. No. That sounds like a you problem. He pointed at Thomas and then at Virgil, who shifted uncomfortably and scowled. Or a him problem. Thomas, like it or not, the Duke does encompass a portion of your imagination, Logan said calmly, and Remus wondered whether the logical side could be counted as a light side at all. Surely he wasn't a dark side. No, he didn't have enough of an agenda for that. But he seemed fairly neutral. Perhaps he was neither. If that were so, Remus would have to keep an eye on him. No good having loose cannons lying around where people could trip over them and snap their own necks. Patton said, Imaginative is sure a kind word for him. Remus didn't bother much with Patton. Deceit had laid claim to that one. Not like that did anything for the treacherous snake. No, Remus was more fond of Logan and his strange neutrality. I agree, he said, despite himself. How about demented? And then the miraculous happened, and Remus almost squealed in victory. Virgil turned to Logan and asked dangerously, Why are you defending him? What a fun game. I simply must congratulate Deceit for his wondrous idea. Perhaps I could bring him and Virgil both back to us. I'm not, Logan said, despite the suspicious looks he received from both Virgil and Thomas. I'm just trying to be intellectually honest with Thomas. Sounds like bullshit to me, Remus said flippantly, just to add some more chaos to the mix. The stork's Deceit in a disguise. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. It was ridiculous how easy they all fell for it. It was all so simple, and Remus was loving it. Minimal effort on his part, plus an added bonus of setting Virgil off so the edge he was turning into his own friends. Perhaps there was hope for him after all. Shadows, if they stayed too long near the light, would burn away. Remus hoped Virgil knew that, because that's what's happening. He was burning away, and Deceit would not be content to just let that happen. Virgil belonged to the shadows. He was the shadows. He would return to them, and if Virgil returned to them, Deceit would follow. They would be whole again. After Logan, they assured everyone that, yes, in fact, he was Logan, and Remus admitted to lying, just to mess with them. Virgil once more turned to the fellow side. Then why are you lying? Lying? Logan repeated. Remus almost wanted to take him back to the others, just to see what they could do with his brain. Those cool ambitions Logan would flourish under their care, his neutrality nurtured and honored. Remus almost itched for it. You just said Duke is Thomas's imagination. Patton said something that agreed with Virgil. Honestly, Remus wasn't listening to morality. Patton was too emotional, boring, and soft. Remus preferred Logan and Virgil, and so they went on, Remus messing around with Thomas's thoughts, muttering the dynamics between the light sides. It was humorous, because according to Deceit, they worked together seamlessly, but as soon as Remus showed up, they seemed to split down the middle. It was interesting, but not as interesting as Logan's continued calm and measured thoughts, or Virgil's aggressive denial of literally everything, as well as his panic. He was so on edge. The Duke was thriving. You made me this way, Thomas, he purred to his host. I was the unloved brother from the Genesis. Roman and I are Cain and Abel. Ooh, Roman liked that. He was fitting. How very unnerving. And then, of course, he had thrown in some kind of butt stuff, mocking Thomas's work. Strangely, he seemed to get Logan's calm to break slightly. Interesting. Remus tucked the knowledge away for later, for after Virgil and Deceit had come back to them, he could claim Logan as the dark side as well. "Oh, I'm sorry," he continued hauntingly after Logan's little disruption. "Didn't you forget that I'm your creativity? Obviously, I have opinions on the matter." "But are they opinions that matter?" Virgil asked snappishly. Remus just smiled a little wider because Virgil was doing it himself. He was truly so worried about Thomas finding out about his past. Were the others so fragile in their friendship security that one wrong work, one acknowledgement of the wrong thing could break them apart? How pathetic. Honestly, Remus wouldn't envy them one bit. Push, push, push. How far the push they can before it's broke. Push, push, push some more. Suggest things. Let his inner radness out, and some pressure to Thomas make them remember those thoughts, see how much they can take before they crumble. I just did what I do as one of Thomas's sides, he said. If I'm awful, then so is Thomas. And Virgil got agitated once more. Not all thoughts have some profound meaning behind them. Some are worthless. Remus sighed, pouting ever so slightly. Time to push a little harder then. Virgil, you've never been one to soften the truth. Anxiety recoiled. Why would you aspire to be so boring? You've changed, is what he was actually saying to his fellow dark side. Come back to us, Virgil. We want you back. You're coming back. We're going to get you back. The last push worked, and Virgil was the first to fold, surrendering to the thought that Thomas wasn't necessarily a good person. It was assuming that to hear such hopelessness, such defeat in his voice that had once been so bitter and proud and strong, Virgil had been away from them for too long. He can act like a good person, just like Deceit can act like you, but we've also seen that doing what he thinks is right can be pretty difficult for him. You two are blowing this way out of proportion. Logan, I'm sorry, but Thomas can't logic his way out of this one. Facts are facts, and the fact is, Thomas had twisted thoughts that a stable person would never have. How delightful. They were all caving, and Remus couldn't be more pleased. They were all caving, except Logan, and Remus watched in fascination as the collected side simply reasoned his way forward. He never stumbled, never faltered. Remus desperately wanted to see how far the balance spread, and how he could break it. Then the most glorious thing happened. Logan barely stopped himself from calling Virgil paranoid. Oh, the old Deceit would have killed to be there for it, and Remus made a mental note to brag about it to the others when he got back. The look on Virgil's face was so hurt, the sting he felt. Oh, Remus basked in it. This was brilliant. Regardless of whether or not he won this or not, whether he got banished or not, Remus had gained something so very precious. He was irritated by Logan's abilities to land his blows and prevent Remus's impact, even when Remus stole his teeth, threw a ninja star, did everything. The side was unaffected. That was quite frustrating, yet so intriguing. The lights encouraged Thomas to get some rest, and Remus knew that one last push could undo the iron grip Virgil had on his memories. He'd had to admit, after the pressure from Remus and the breaking of the wall combined, Logan's gentle scolding, his own paranoia. The dark sides were winning, and they were winning by a long shot. They weren't, and everyone seemed to know it except Remus. They are behind because Deceit had left them, just like Virgil had left them. And it was all going to fall down eventually. You know what's funny? Virgil said to the Duke, voice calmer. Used to be really unsettling to me. I thought you were some terrible illness. Now I can see that you're just the common cold, a mild inconvenience. That's gone before you know it. Remus just had to laugh because, oh, Virgil, things decided couldn't win this anymore. Once he admitted it, they'd come for him, would swarm him like flies. The Duke didn't unsettle him anymore. Fine. There were more to come. Oh, you tickle me, Emo. He clapped. Well, I enjoyed this. Good seeing you again. Oh, and Virgil? It was just like old times. And then he sank out, not without leaving a small connection open through Thomas. He needed to know if some malicious planning had paid off. He listened through minutes of boring drivel, feelings, ick. He listened until it was only Virgil, and he heard the blessed words they'd all been waiting for. Because I was one of them. You still are. Remus breathed and something stabbed through him when there was no snake hissing in his ear. Welp, that is the end of the 5-book series by Bekka911, Bad Moon Rising, and all the books in the series, for that matter, has been tremendous, and it has been such a pleasure reading them. If you'd like to hear more books from me, click on the screen. If you'd like to go to my channel, click on the screen. And if you'd like to go to my live channel, click on the screen. My social media is like Twitter, Instagram, Wattpad, Discord, are down in the description below if you'd like to visit those. I really encourage you to. It's fun. Just overall, thank you for listening, watching. I really appreciate it. And do your best.